With the conclusion of the Masters, a lot of us are excited to finally get our golf season started this year, and that means a lot of us are in the market for a new driver because we want to show up on day one and hit bombs. So what we're going to try to do today is talk about what an optimal driver might look like for you and how that might disagree with some of the norms that are currently out there in the golf environment. So when we're talking about drivers, a lot of people like to talk about optimal numbers. And the thing is that optimal numbers are going to be different per person because each person delivers the club slightly differently. So a good spin rate for me delivering the club at 0 might not be a great spin rate for somebody who hits 2 down on it or 2 up on it. So we need to really factor in a lot of these important things when we decide what's going to be optimal and work best for us. So before we get into what's optimal for you, we've always got to have a starting point. And most of us are familiar with going into the big golf retailer and looking at all the different clubs and kind of getting a feel for this looks good and I like that and this sounds pleasant. And there is a preference that's really important here because when you look down at your driver, you have to see something that you feel confident in. So for me, I'm a tailor-made driver kind of guy. I have been for several years. I really like the shape. So that's a really abstract thing and I probably can't describe it to you very much other than I like how the face sits within the head, meaning that there's not really loft visible to me even though I play a lot of loft, and I really like how that face is kind of protected by the outer frame of the club. So for me that fits my eye very well and I like that. Now some person might look at this and go, well, that's the worst looking driver head I've ever seen, and that's totally fine, but we need to kind of start at a point to where you like the general look and sound and feel of the golf club. Because if you don't like how it looks and feels the first time we mishit it, we're going to be looking at buying a new driver because we don't like this thing anymore. So starting from a place to where you like the general outline of the golf club is a great place. And more importantly, because the major OEMs make different models of the same thing, we generally can find a shape or a head or a brand that we kind of like, and then we can dial it in with the different versions and the different shafts and the different lofts. So finding something that you like is a great place to start. So for me, really like this TaylorMade head. I'm also playing a TPT 18 high nitro golf shaft. Just recently put this in play. Really like it as well. So you can see that I'm playing a pretty high-end kind of long drive type setup, and I'm playing the shaft at 45 inches because I'm not a long drive guy. I actually play golf. So we'll talk a little bit more about the shaft and how that relates to the head a little bit later, but starting from a point of, hey, I kind of like this thing is a great place to start when we start dialing in this driver for you. So now that we found a driver that we like how it looks and feels and sounds, now we want to go ahead and grab a bucket and take this thing onto the range and put it into play. So once we start hitting this driver and we agree that we like how it sounds, we like how it feels, the ball's flying more or less how we like, now it's important to start dialing in the performance. And there's one number above all else that we really need to look at when it comes to finding the optimal driver for you. And that number is without a doubt carry. We have to optimize carry before we worry about anything else. And the reason for that is because most places that you play golf don't get what a TrackMan or a Foresight or a Full Swing or any of these launch monitors would deem optimal rollout. For myself living in Michigan, it's basically a peninsula in between the Great Lakes, and it's very wet and soft here. We get a lot of rain. So for us, we're gonna see maybe 5 to 10 yards of rollout, even with an optimal spin rate. So the idea that we fit off of this total number is really absurd for a lot of people because they will chase the total number because it's the bigger number, but they'll sacrifice the carry to do so by lowering the spin rate to get it to run more. But we've already talked about how the ball is not going to roll more than 5 or 10 yards in my environment. So for me, making sure I'm getting maximum carry is super important because at the end of the day, carry is like the paycheck you put in the bank. We know it's going to be there. We know we can take it out. It's always there. And then when we think about total, that's kind of the interest that we hope accumulates on top of what we put in. Now, sometimes interest rates are good, but a lot of times interest rates aren't that great. So we want to make sure that we got plenty of money in the bank when you step up to that tee. So talking about optimizing carry, it's really, really important. this is what we've got to do for most golfers, because most of us are not going to see those PGA Tour fairways where we're getting that 35 yards of optimal rollout. So what do? We optimize carry. So when we talk about carry, this is a great point to talk about the redheaded stepchild in the room, which is spin, or at least that's how the industry treats spin. And backspin on a golf ball is not the enemy like many of us have been told and led to believe over the years. And a big reason that we've been told this is because pre-1999, we actually played with a Balata golf ball that did want to spin way more than the current urethane golf ball. So back in the day, yeah, we wanted to eliminate spin and we were always trying to get rid of it. But now with the current clubs and the current golf balls, we see that when we mishit one, it tends to underspin, not overspin. And when the ball underspins, what ends up happening is it doesn't stay in the air. So if the ball isn't in the air, then obviously we can't optimize our carry. So it becomes super important to start recognizing that this fallacy of wanting to be at 2,000 RPMs of spin is not high enough for most people, because they can't launch the ball high enough to make that spin rate work for them. They simply do not have enough speed, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if they change their theory and stop thinking of backspin as being the worst thing ever, now all of a sudden we can make their carry much farther, and when they go out and play and it's a little bit soft, what we see is that they tend to see a lot more distance in the bag than they traditionally do, due to the fact they're not getting that rollout. So when we look at, spin, right, there's a lot of numbers here, but this is kind of cool because we can start kind of talking about how spin relates to some of these different parameters, right? So really cool. Ping does an amazing job with this. Marty Jertson, the entire team at Ping, they have an amazing podcast, the Ping Proving Grounds. I really recommend if you're looking for good information. I think these guys kill it over at Ping, so good on you guys. Thank you for providing us good information. Appreciate you doing the research. But when we start looking at the spin rates, right, what we're gonna see is that, kind of like, if you're 150 mile an hour ball speed and you launch it at 11, like 2750 is kind of your ideal spin number, right? So 150 ball speed, that means you're swinging it around 100 miles an hour. Okay, so we're talking about kind of more or less average types of people, and we're seeing that we need them to have about 2750 backspin on the golf ball to produce their optimal carry. And I think that if a lot of us went in and did a fitting at a major retailer and we hit a golf ball at 2750, the person doing it is probably going to say, well, that's spinning way too much. Let's put you in something stiffer, heavier, and lower that spin rate. Because yes, that will produce a higher total, but it will bring the golf ball down and cause it to roll out more. And we know that we may not get that depending on where we live. So if you live in the desert and it's firm and fast all the time, like, good on you. Like, lower the spin rate, launch it as high as you can, and play golf. But if you're somebody who lives, a little farther north and it's pretty lush and green most of the year, then we really need to start thinking of like an ideal spin rate for most golfers, not the elite, not the super fast, not the fast Eddies of the world. But if we start thinking about the people watching this video and me, we kind of want to think somewhere between 2,500 and 3,500 is kind of the window that we're looking for. So we got that driver that we like the looks and sound and feel of. We're out hitting some golf balls, and if we have access to a TrackMan or a GC Quad or anything like that, what we're able to do is we're able to start looking at the spin rate. And when we look at that spin rate, we're looking for something roughly between 2,500 at a minimum and 3,500 at a maximum. And what we want to do is we actually want to try to aim for the middle. So trying to get right around 3,000 on that stock shot is not going to be a bad place to start. So once again, considering that there's different lofts of the same head and different versions of the same head, we can start kind of playing around to see which one of those heads looks, sounds, feels the best and produces somewhere between that 2,500 and 3,500 RPM spin rate, because now we know that we're getting close to where we need to be in terms of creating an optimal driver for us. Okay, so we got this driver, we're really liking it, and we're almost ready to make our purchase, but we want to dial this in just a little bit more. So when we talk about optimal, right, we're trying to get as close to perfect as possible with this driver, and we know that a decent window for us is going to be somewhere between 25 and 3,500 RPM. Now, like I said, that is for somebody roughly swinging the golf club around 100 miles an hour. So if you think you swing way faster than 100 miles an hour or slower than 100 miles an hour, once again, you can consult this chart, and now we can start looking at a few different parameters and how those parameters match up with the spin rate and the launch angle that we're trying to create to make this optimal driver for you. So looking at what are some of the things that go into spin rate, one of the biggest things that we need to look at with the driver in particular is our angle of attack. And that is really, really important for us to look at, because when we think about a driver, we have to keep in mind that we're starting with the second lowest lofted golf club in the bag next to the putter, right? So we've all seen Martin Borgmeister and all those guys hitting putters like 300 yards, which is really cool, but it's difficult to do because the golf ball doesn't get very high because there's no loft to launch the golf ball. It only has maybe 3 degrees. And a driver currently tends to have somewhere between 8 and 12 degrees, depending on which type of head you're playing, and that's not a lot of loft to start with. So when we think about starting with a minimal amount of loft on the face, how we're swinging that loft into the ball becomes very, very important. Because if I start swinging the club more down and I started with not a lot of loft to begin with, it's not going to take very much for me to really have a difficult time getting the golf ball to launch in the air. So we really want to kind of start by looking at this angle of attack. So we got a driver, we're between 25 to 3,500, and we're seeing that it's like maybe 3,250. Okay, so that's a little higher than the 3,000 number that I said is kind of where we want to be, and we want to know, is that good or bad for us? So if we're seeing a slightly higher spin rate, generally what we should see is a little steeper angle of attack. And generally speaking, with a driver, for most people, we don't want to get the angle of attack below 2 degrees down, meaning we don't want to be more than 2 degrees down with the driver, because that really starts taking a lot of the loft out of the scenario. In addition to taking loft out of the scenario with the attack angle being down, there's also a greater chance of the D plane, or where the face is pointed, being left with that downward attack angle, meaning a closed club face. So if I'm hitting down, taking away loft, and then the face is getting shut relative to the path because I'm hitting more down and going into my extension phase of my right arm and releasing the golf club, then we're going to have the danger of left going left, and that's a very low shot, and obviously is not going to produce a very high carry because it's not in the air for very long. So now we flip to the other side of the coin, and this is where I think the industry is a little misleading to most golfers. So you can see here we have the Swing Catalyst force plates. If you've heard anything about force plates, you've kind of heard the same thing. Everybody's late. Everybody's super late getting to their lead side and then being able to post up and rotate around that lead side. So everybody kind of agrees on that when it comes to ground reaction forces. And if people are teeing the ball way up in the air trying to hit 6 degrees up on it, I am here to tell you most people are going to be more inclined to want to try to sit down on this right side and swing up that way. And we can see that my pressure stays back, I never get it to the left, and my transfer of energy is just not going to be nearly as efficient. So I think the idea of, hey, it's okay to swing 6-7 degrees up on it is really not the best advice for most golfers. Not only is it going to be difficult for them to do and get their pressure left, which is already difficult, but it's also going to create some dynamics with the D plane to where we have to manipulate a lot of things to try to get that golf ball to start and stay on target. So once again, I think trying to limit the attack angle to +2 is a good place to start for most golfers. So if you're one of those people who, like I said, maybe you're not 3250, maybe you're closer to 2250, okay? And like we said, that's a little too low. Well, if you're maybe 3 degrees, 2 degrees positive attack angle and at 2250, that might be a really good recipe for you. So it's once again kind of understanding like where our spin window is relative to how we deliver the club and matching those things together. Because when we match those together, what we're going to see is not only is the good shot pretty darn good, but the misses are a lot more predictable and make a lot more sense, meaning that we're not getting the weird one that we hit a little bit on the toe and it darts left and those types of things, right? We want to have a predictable miss. So when we're kind of playing around with this driver, we want to see that when we miss it, When we feel like it should have curved right, we want to see it that it curved right. When we feel like it should have curved left, we want to see that it should have curved left. And then we want to see that spin rate on those misses stay in that window of 25 to 3,500, because if we're getting our misses in the right spin windows, then the ball is going to stay in the air. And if the ball stays in the air, then we're going to maximize our carry. And if we maximize our carry, then you're going to have the best opportunity possible to attack that green with your next shot, which is how we start putting together a round of golf. So creating an ideal scenario for you with your driver is key. And I think it's really important that we take a more holistic look instead of simply focusing on one optimal number, which may or may not be optimal for you. So it's been a great year for us. We've had a lot of success on the golf course already and are super proud of all the athletes we work with. And a lot of those athletes do play for money and play at the highest stakes. So with that said, a lot of those athletes that I'm fortunate enough to work with play with a driver that generally is not optimized for total. Meaning that when they hit their driver, even if they hit it as good as they can, there's probably a chance that they're leaving 5, 6, 7, 8 yards on the table, even though they're hitting that driver great, because it tends to spin a little bit more than what the optimal windows would be. Because like I said, we want to have enough spin to create predictability with the ball flight. When we lower the spin rate, that's when we kind of get the knucklers that really get sensitive to wind and things like that. So it's not that hard to find something that you like the looks of, you like the shape of, you like the sound of. And then from there, just with some basic launch monitor data, we can really dial this driver in for you. And I encourage you to always be willing to try new things. I think this TPT shaft is going to be a pretty cool addition to the bag this year. We just got it in. I'm really excited about it. I appreciate the team sending one over. Really cool stuff. I've got it in the fairway as well. But you know, I would have never thought that playing a whippier soft shaft would have been the way I would go to actually find more fairways. But I gotta be honest, having a club to where I feel like I don't have to really do that much to it really makes my ground reaction forces better and really feels like it puts me back in control. So I think the idea of going stiffer and heavier is generally not the best for most golfers. If we're having issues with getting the face to path or getting the spin rate correct, I think that's looking at some of the characteristics we talked about earlier in the delivery of the club versus trying to fix it with the golf club, because as the club gets stiffer and heavier, it requires better timing to act on this shaft and get it to kick back out. And if we're getting stiff and heavy and the club's already kind of getting out and away and we're steep, then when we do actually square one up, we're gonna hit a knuckle bomb. And I'm not saying that that's not fun to do, but if we're hitting a knuckle bomb in a crosswind, sometimes that's not the most fun because it's not a very predictable golf shot and the wind tends to take it for a ride. So we totally hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, please make sure to leave them in the comments section below. We'll do everything we can to answer your questions and help you try to get your driver a little bit more dialed as well. So thanks so much. Make sure to subscribe to this channel. And until next time, keep grinding.